Thank you for joining us on our OTT platforms with Brian Crowley and Mary Anna Mancuso. Familiar faces to all of you at home. Our News Channel 5 political analyst. As I speak, we're about an hour and a half till the 9 p.m. Democratic presidential debate in Nevada that will be airing right here on NBC. I hope you just joined us for our special edition of To The Point. But as we look at the field, Bernie Sanders leading in polls nationally, Joe Biden falling in the polls, still number 2 at 15%. Michael Bloomberg hoping to occupy that centrist lane if Biden fades. He's at 14%, spent about $400 million on his campaign, a lot of that right here in Florida. You can't get away from his ads in Florida. Elizabeth Warren trying to put some new wind in her sails. She's at also 14%. Then behind them you have Pete Buttigieg, former mayor of South Bend, Indiana, 13%. Amy Klobuchar, the centrist senator from Minnesota, 7%. You were there in New Hampshire, Brian, a good showing there. Those are the candidates on stage tonight. Tom Steyer, the billionaire entrepreneur from California, didn't make tonight's debate. Size up the field, especially with the Florida flavor, as we're looking at the debate tonight and kind of the landscape for the candidates and how it applies to Florida.
You know, one of the takeaways from New Hampshire that I don't think has been spoken about enough is that when you look at the top three, two of the top three are Buttigieg and Klobuchar, right? And they both are moderate Democrats. Mm-hmm. You know, so when you look at their percentage of the total, you know, they're actually ahead of Bernie when you're talking about total that have voted for somebody who is moderate. So as much noise as there's been about the hardcore Bernie Sanders vote, it'd be interesting to see how the other candidates handle it in the debate tonight, because they can easily, the argument has been, if they go too far to the left, they can't win. Well,
the argument in 2016, Mary Anna, or the argument being made now about that history, is that then candidate Donald Trump benefited from such a fractured party that more moderate centrist views there were crowding each other out, and he was able with his candidacy to find an opening. Many argue Bernie Sanders may well do that in 2020 with centrists fighting with each other, and you get enough of the votes, suddenly you have delegates and you head to the convention and you're the nominee. We're a long way from that, but your take.
Well, I think that it's not as fractured as the Republican Party was going into 2016. If we're looking today at 2020 in the Democrat Party, we're not seeing as much fracture. If you look at Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, they're not that far off from one another in terms of ideology and where they stand. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, to Brian's point, again, right about there. Joe Biden was the real centrist, and unfortunately, he's been falling asleep at the debates and isn't really having a great campaign season. However, Michael Bloomberg sees the opportunity, which is why tonight everybody will be paying attention to him.
The Bloomberg factor, or I'm a Star Trek fan, some call it the Bloomberg Borg, the amount of money he's bringing back. It's an old Star Trek term for the Borg who couldn't be stopped, but some have called it the Bloomberg Borg. Certainly the Bloomberg factor is he's a billionaire on the order of $54 to $60 billion net worth, spent about $400 million, says I'm completely self-funded. Elected to not be in the first several races, won't really join till Super Tuesday. Democrats are arguing you shouldn't be able to buy elections. He's arguing what's better, to self-fund and not worry about special interests, or to have to slog through that. Talk about the Bloomberg factor in the debate tonight.
Well, first off, I think the money argument is silly. I don't think anybody cares about the money argument. In fact, in past elections, you would have been arguing about all these people who are taking all these money from businesses and et cetera, and all these super PACs that were out there supporting them. Bloomberg saying, I'm not going to be beholden to anybody. I'm spending only my own money. And he's said, we'll see if he lives up to it, that if he doesn't get the nomination, he's going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in whoever the nominee is. He clearly believes that he doesn't want to have Trump have a second term. And they can take on the money issue tonight, but I just don't think it'll resonate with voters.
How viable a centrist alternative do you think he ultimately is? That will be the huge debate. There's no answer we're going to have just at this table, and certainly not tonight. But the intrigue is, can he be that viable alternative to a Buttigieg? People who like him say, yep. Others say 38 needs to have more seasoning. Amy Klobuchar, not enough money to go the distance. A wonderful senator, they argue, from Minnesota, but will she have the staying power nationally? Joe Biden, we've talked about that. I mean, it's intriguing to me how that will play out tonight.
It is.
And beyond.
Right, and when they talk about, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, one of the biggest dings he gets aside from his age is the inability to resonate with Hispanic and African American voters. He has also the experience issue. People are like, look, you're 38 years old, can you be president? And Michael Bloomberg has had opportunity when he was mayor of New York City. He's had electability. Now he's going to have to answer to things like stop and frisk when he was mayor of New York City.
To fight crime, stop and
he's
frisk,
going to have some issues.
He's apologized on that.
However, he does.
But he's going to have to apologize many times over.
Absolutely.
one expects. Alleged sexual misbehavior, comments that were sexist over the years. He's going to be hammered on that as well. What is the case ultimately of Michael Bloomberg, who's not been in the game, at least on stage till tonight? What's the case you would expect to hear him trying to make on specifics about his ability, about, say, the economy or healthcare? In his first introduction to a broad swath of the public, how's he make his case tonight?
I think his case is, you know, I built something from nothing. I created a business. I've made payroll. I've had to be something other than an elected official, and he's knocked out a good portion of the stage just with that comment alone.
Brian?
Well, plus he's going to say, in my 12 years as mayor of New York, here are my accomplishments. The city is a better place today than it was before I became mayor. I made some mistakes with stop and frisk, but you know, I also overall was able to reduce crime in the city, and he'll talk about the economy in New York and all the other things that he'll take credit for as mayor, and I think has largely over the years gotten credit for being a good mayor of New York. So I think he'll point to his accomplishments in New York as well as his business accomplishments.
What do you expect to be the most effective kind of counter arguments we will hear to that Bloomberg candidacy tonight?
Well, I mean, some of them will try to use the sexual comments and the stop and frisk. They feel like that's going to be big, and they'll try to use issues like that. I don't know. They'll probably say, you know, not until not too long ago you were a Republican. You're not really a Democrat. You're trying to be an opportunist, just looking to buy the presidency. But I don't know that they'll be able to beat him up on too many of his other issues. I mean, he is a successful businessman. You can't take that away from him. You could attack him on the fact, and this is a little disturbing as a journalist, you know, he's basically told Bloomberg News they're not allowed to cover him.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you want to be Trump-like, that's it. I mean, wouldn't Trump love it if he could tell the newspapers he doesn't like and the TV stations he doesn't like, you can't cover me. So he's told Bloomberg News they can't cover him, and apparently from what I read today, that was true even before he ran, that Bloomberg News was not allowed to cover him as an individual or his family life. So that's a little disturbing to use that kind of leverage.
The counter argument you would expect to hear loudly, long and often tonight, Mary Anna?
Well, I think they're going to hammer him on the fact that he's funding his own campaign, but it's interesting because if we think about people that are like, oh, you're going to fund your own campaign, you're just going to spend all this money, they haven't gone after Tom Steyer for that, who is self-funding his campaign. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, who is running leaps and bounds in terms of being a political chameleon, that man is it. He's an independent from Vermont, and he's running as a Democratic Socialist in the Democrat Party. So how is that guy going to take aim at Bloomberg, who apparently isn't Democrat enough?
Talk about the Republican perspective, as many of our viewers sitting here, Republicans and Democrats and independents watching, no doubt, but for Republicans watching this saying, well, okay, we're pretty happy. Our guy's got the entire base behind him and is cruising toward November. By the way, Republicans are on pace to raise more than $1 billion for the President Trump reelection effort. So when we talk money in politics, plenty to go around on all sides. From a Republican perspective, you know, some are saying we feel mighty confident. Others seem to be nervous about the Bloomberg candidacy. Others say Sanders, we'd have no worry if a Democratic Socialist ran. It's a very interesting political calculus on who they really want to see or not see come November.
Well, as I said earlier, they're all lighting candles tonight praying that Bernie Sanders becomes the nominee for the Democratic Party because they would love to run against a self-proclaimed socialist. You know, he doesn't try to walk away from that title, and Republicans and frankly even some Democrats, you know, they just cringe at the idea that we would have a socialist president.
You don't like absolutes, Ben. You've been covering the political machinations for many a decade, but do you think Bernie Sanders would have any real chance of winning in November? And I know a lot of things can happen, and in November, I don't want you to be on record that I pull up the quote later, but even your comment you just made is the mood of a lot of Democrats.
Sticking with my lifetime philosophy of never predicting.
Yes, which is a good one.
And Lord knows 2016 proved me right on that, you know, but I don't know. I don't
it's a tough
have an
one.
answer to that.
Yeah.
That's
No, and I'm not trying to put you on the spot.
There you are.
And, well, but nicely. I'm doing it with a long friendship.
You're not the first.
But you are talking about certainly in a very real way. I read it every day. I hear about it every day. Can he carry the water for the entire party? Can he break out of his very enthusiastic supporters to a broader base? Mary Anna, weigh in.
I think it's going to be extremely difficult for him. He's gone so far left that he's almost come full right, no, I'm kidding. But he has gone so far left. How does he in the general election move to the center of the Democrat Party, bring in independent voters, bring in moderate Republicans who may be fed up with Trump and don't want to be part of that, and also the moderate Democrats? How does he do that knowing that his policies are so focused on Democrat socialism?
Here's something Democrats have to decide. While I was in New Hampshire, I was talking to a woman who was very supportive of Hillary Clinton.
Sure.
And when Hillary Clinton and her husband was very supportive of somebody else. The husband, as a protest vote, voted for Jill Stein. Well, if you're going to do protest votes in the Democratic Party, you're going to hurt your own candidate. So, you know, some Democrats may have to decide whether they like Bernie Sanders or not. If he's the one that gets the nomination, they're going to have to be all in. And, you know, or they may get Trump for another 4 years.
And final thoughts, we talk about it every cycle, and not just for the White House races, although we all talk about sort of the Super Bowl of races, but your final thoughts as we look at the debate tonight, as you at home look at it and put it in perspective about Florida's central role in any campaign like this and why it's so important, and where Florida, this huge battleground state tied for New York for the third most electoral votes in the nation, come November, why it matters no matter where we are on the political calendar, our primary March 17th. Mary Anna, shape that understanding and debate for our voters who will be getting ready in March, Democrats, to go out and vote.
Well, as you mentioned, we have 219 delegates that will be awarded in March. And it's really important because, look, this is a large state. We're not a tiny state. We have 67 counties. We've got 10
21
media
million
markets.
people.
Oh, it's ridiculous. And fun fact today, the average median age in Florida, do you know what it is, the average median age? 43.
Okay.
It's a much younger state.
I would
than
thought it
most.
was, yeah, you and I wish.
So close. But the reality is that those are the people that are voting because they're looking into Social Security, they're looking at retirement, they're suffering with health care.
I thought it would skew a little older just because of our retirees.
Absolutely, but they all need health care. Immigration is a hot topic, gun policy, all of these things. Florida is this melting pot of issues of America, and we are a representation of the greatest nation on earth.
Ryan, weave together in your final thoughts. Florida, its importance, and for our viewers out there as they're getting ready to think about who they'll vote for in just several short weeks on the Democratic side of the ledger. Some are saying I'm Republicans, I'm waiting to November, but the sense of it as we move forward.
Well, I mean, you know, we are a melting pot of representing the rest of the country. I mean, you know, whites, Hispanics, African Americans, and then the subgroups within all of that. So we're a microcosm of the rest of the nation. So if you win Florida, you have a much better chance that you may be actually representing the country as a whole.
And come November, it's generally said, maybe to the point that it's conventional wisdom we use too much, but there doesn't seem to be any political math that gets you to the White House without Florida in your electoral column.
I mean, I don't see any at this point. I think it's particularly critical to Trump because he might lose a couple of the other Midwestern states. So I think he has to hang on to Florida,
as he did in 2016, winning Florida.
Yeah. So, it's, you know, you can't lose the 27 electoral votes here without having to make them up in 3 or 4 other states. So that's the problem.
You want to bring those mega states in as quickly as you can. Mary Anna, final thought.
Well, I think tonight the biggest thing that we're going to pay attention to, as I said earlier in the broadcast, is watching Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar try and bring in the Latino vote, speak to the African American vote, and then we'll also be paying attention to make sure Joe Biden stays awake and Elizabeth Warren can salvage her campaign.
Can Joe Biden, he's arguing, listen, you're writing me off too quickly. I've got South Carolina coming up, huge African American vote where traditionally would be expected to do well, that it's his firewall. Brian?
You know, I'm not convinced that in the way this primary season is shaping up, where you have some guy walking in with $400 million and more, who skips the early states and is targeting Super Tuesday in Florida a week later, that the dynamic is there for that to change. You know, they're running a campaign that was great for the last 40 years, do the early states and then move, and then somebody pops out and you move on. I think that formula's changed this time.
We thank you both very much for being with us on To The Point earlier. For our OTT audience, we're all going to gather around and watch the debate and parse all of that. Yeah, it's going to be interesting tonight. I think a lot of people are going to be tuning in. As always, thank you for being with us on our OTT platforms. Of course, we'll be back To The Point on Sunday. And again, I kid them. This time of year, I've got seatbelts. They're not going anywhere until after November. Brian Crowley, Mary Anna Mancuso, always a pleasure. Thank you for your expertise. And again, thank you for being with us. Have a wonderful evening.